Welcome to What I Watched This Month, reviews of each movie I saw this month in 1 minute or less. I will be discussing the overall premise of most movies, but will not reveal any crucial ending spoilers. Hero is a Chinese martial arts film about a king who has survived multiple assassination attempts as he tries to rule a fractured kingdom. One day, a mysterious person arrives and announces he has killed the 3 assassins who have been threatening the king, and the story unfolds. There's a Rashomon-style quality to this narrative, as we see different versions of the story until finally the truth is revealed at the end. It adds some liveliness to the narrative, which otherwise drags for me. The bright spots here are absolutely the fight scenes, which are visually stunning, with vivid colors and carefully crafted shots and moments of fantasy where characters fly and run across water. It's one of those unusual instances where I actually felt like the story in between was just a placeholder until we could get to those gorgeous combat sequences. But there aren't as many of those as I wish there were, and I just had very little interest in the central story, so every time we moved back to another bit of exposition or explanation, I sighed a little. It's well worth watching for the astonishing visuals, but I was less sold on the rest. Kismet is a musical based on a Broadway production of a few years before. It tells the story of an unnamed poet trying to eke out a living for himself and his grown daughter in ancient Baghdad. He falls into trouble and manages to frequently talk himself out of it, but ultimately involves his daughter, the wazir, and the caliph in his plotting. So let's address the elephant in the room. Every single main character here is a person of color played by a white person, and the show makes a lot of use of exotic Arabian Nights-style stereotypes, which are, oh, so messy. That being said, this movie does look so gorgeous. It's got these vivid colors and these great big dramatic shots that make the whole thing feel very musical theater and very larger than life in all the best ways. And while the songs themselves don't really stand out, the vocal performances are so lovely, and I was never bored watching them. This has all the earmarks of a classic golden age Hollywood musical, and I enjoyed all those trappings so much, while also really wishing it wasn't quite so much cultural cosplay. Brainscan is a supremely silly sci-fi horror movie from the 90s about a young boy who orders a mysterious new video game that promises to be the pinnacle of immersive terror, but as he plays it, he begins to realize that the adrenaline-inducing crimes he's committing in the game may be happening in real life. For as much fun as that premise is, I had higher expectations for this movie as campy fun, and it never quite meets those. Part of this is due to the movie not being fully sure what side of camp it wants to land on, whether to go with this over-the-top terror of, I may have just murdered my best friend, or to go just plain goofy with the appearance of the Freddy Krueger-esque demon living inside the video game. The two styles just don't mesh very well, with the actual deaths and danger seeming just slightly too real for the goofy body horror gags of the central villain. That's not to say that any of this feels realistic, but it's hard to combine existential what have I done horror with quippy men and silly monster makeup. It's not terrible, but it could have been a lot more fun than this. The Great Muppet Caper is, well, a movie about the Muppets doing a caper. Kermit and Fozzie are reporters who travel to England in the hopes of getting a scoop on the theft of Lady Holiday's priceless jewels. Kermit meets Miss Piggy, who he thinks is Lady Holiday but is actually just her secretary, and eventually the group discovers the thieves and sets out to foil their next plan. I've never really been sold on the Muppet movies. I didn't grow up with them, so I don't have any nostalgic fondness for their films, but that being said, this one is great. Lots of clever and funny jokes, like the scene with Piggy and Kermit sneaking around in John Cleese's house, or the running gag that Fozzie and Kermit are identical twins. But the thing that really swayed me here was the musical numbers. A lot of Muppet movie songs are good, but still always feel like they're for kids, so there's a layer of distancing. But here, the songs hold just as much weight and emotional power as any other musical film, and they're used in quiet, subtle ways, not always loud and bombastic. That bike ride song was a particular favorite. I was just blown away by how enjoyable this was. I think I may have found the one Muppet movie I really love, and it's not one I would have guessed. Blue Sky stars Tommy Lee Jones as a military scientist working on nuclear testing, and Jessica Lange as his vivacious but mentally unstable wife. Their relationship always feels like it's perched precariously, with her just seconds away from impulsively torpedoing everything they have, and the film follows them through one such event and how they try to put their lives back together afterwards. It's also all intermingled with the politics of ethical nuclear testing in a way that feels awkward at first, but makes more sense the more the film continues. The shining piece of this film is Jessica Lange's performance. this. She does such an incredible job at making this character more than the caricature she could be. We can see her fears and her thought processes and root for her to do the right thing and not fall into her self-destructive habits. And in the later half of the movie, when she really does step up into being the protagonist, it's really lovely. I also appreciate the frequent focus on the children of this marriage and how their parents' volatility affects them, even as they've learned to live with it as a constant factor in their lives. It's a messy movie at times, but it's worth seeing for Lang, if nothing else. The 101-year-old man who skipped out on the bill and disappeared is apparently a sequel to the movie The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared. I did not know this when I watched this, and was a little lost at first. In the first film, apparently a 100-year-old man and his 80-year-old friend run away and steal a bunch of money together. The sequel never really addresses the crimes he may have committed. There are just a whole bunch of people who are angry at him now and trying to find him. This particular entry in the saga focuses on him trying to find the missing recipe for an unbelievably delicious Russian soft drink. There are a lot of twists and turns and farcical mistakes and monkeys and CIA agents and all kinds of other characters who make their way into the story, but it all feels empty and flat. I'm not sure if seeing the first film would have made the story feel more complete, but it certainly doesn't stand very well on its own. It's all just kind of blah, and I can see them trying to be really absurdly funny, and that makes for a very uncomfortable watch. Running on Empty focuses on a family who has been on the run for 15 years after the parents blew up a napalm manufacturing facility as part of a political effort to stop the Vietnam War. They then spend the next decade and a half constantly moving and changing their names whenever they worry authorities might be getting too close. The story picks up right when their eldest child, now 17 and played by River Phoenix, finds himself struggling with the idea that if he wants to pursue his own life as an adult, he'll most likely never see his family again. Director Sidney Lumet does such a great job of showing how tightly knit this family has necessarily become, and even when they're angry with each other at their circumstances, they're also determined to fiercely protect each other. Their oldest pokes around at possible college options, but genuinely worries that him leaving would destroy his parents, and he doesn't want to do that. Phoenix does a great job of portraying that dilemma. In fact, he's pretty great in this movie overall. I'm not entirely convinced that the film earns its ending, but it is satisfying, and it's a new and unique take on both fugitive stories and coming-of-age dramas. Well worth a watch. Viva Zapata is a biopic about Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, played here by Marlon Brando. The film chronicles his rise to power as he fights to restore stolen lands to the farmers of Mexico. I knew very little about Zapata or about the Mexican Revolution going into this film, but it sounds like director Elia Kazan really did his homework to try to capture the story. I do want to mention the fact that many of the central characters are played by white people, although I did learn that Anthony Quinn was Mexican-American, which was interesting. The story, however, is a powerful and interesting one, despite its outdated casting practices. Zapata is a messy character, especially in the interactions we've seen between him and his romantic partner, but he seems to be the only one able to resist the temptation to use his power for personal gain, and as he has to step up over and over again to use his influence to kick out a corrupt politician, you see him losing faith in the idea that he'll ever be able to stop fighting. The final scenes of this movie, however, make this a hopeful story, not a despairing one. It's a well-crafted movie about a subject I didn't know much about. Maverick is a Western comedy starring Mel Gibson as a gambler trying to make it to the big stakes poker game. Along the way, he has all kinds of misadventures with robbers and runaway stagecoaches and law enforcement and Jodie Foster. This feels most in the vein of a heist movie, where everyone is out to get everyone else all the time, but it's somehow fun and playful. This movie has a lot going for it, but it has aged badly in one aspect. It's tougher to buy Mel Gibson now as a likable rogue now that we know his unpleasantness as a person. That's not always a disqualifier, but this movie absolutely relies on us buying into Gibson's charm hook, line, and sinker, and as a result, it loses a lot of its luster when that can't happen. The script is a lot of fun though. I didn't expect it to be as overtly comedic as it was. There's one bizarre moment of breaking the fourth wall to make a lethal weapon joke. Some of the jokes land better than others, and all would land better if I felt Gibson's charm more, but there's enough enthusiasm for the joke to sell me on their effort overall. Not stellar, not without its problems, but it's still a medium enjoyable popcorn movie. Oh Darling Yeh Hai India is a Bollywood film that I'm having great difficulty finding clips of, so you get a still image of the poster. It tells the story of an unnamed aspiring actor and a prostitute who decide to spend an evening together only to find themselves mixed up in a mob plot to replace the president of India with a surgically manufactured identical twin. This is obviously a ludicrous plot, but it really only becomes the central plot in the film's second half. The beginning is mostly just the two main characters dancing around India, escaping the police and the leading lady's pimp and the mob boss's son who wants her for for himself. It's an over-the-top story with some absolutely delightful song and dance numbers. I particularly liked the dance-off between our hero and the mafia prince. And the story gets more ridiculous as it continues on. I chuckled out loud several times. It's a good 2.5 hours long, like many Bollywood films, but this film really flew by for me. I was having so much fun with it and the characters and wondering what the movie would come up with to throw at us next. Definitely a fun watch. 1917 is an action war movie set during World War I, where two British soldiers are given the task of crossing no man's land to deliver an urgent message to a battalion about to attack the Germans. The film got a ton of acclaim for seeming to be in 2 long, uninterrupted shots, and that definitely does a lot to heighten the tension and immerse you in the character's world. Director Sam Mendes has directed a lot of theater, so he knows how to keep long scenes engaging to his audience. The extremely narrow focus on these characters does a lot to make the tone of the story resonate as well. There are a few final scenes where it seems like all is lost, and when those obstacles are overcome and the hero makes it through, it's hard not to cheer. But it's also more than just adrenaline-fueled action. These incredibly high stakes seem to melt away entirely at the end, with a meditation on the futility and emptiness of war in the first place, and I found that more moving than I do in many films that have a similar goal. The score is also particularly strong here, bringing home a lot of necessary emotional beats. While I don't know if this movie will stick long in my mind, it's very well crafted, and I'm glad I finally watched it. Carousel is a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical probably best known for the song You'll Never Walk Alone. The story focuses on a romance between a young woman named Julie and a carousel barker named Billy. Billy has a reputation for using and discarding his women, and the two have a whirlwind romance and even get married, with Julie convinced she can change him. But their relationship quickly deteriorates. Most of the story is told in flashback after Billy has died, leaving Julie and their child alone on Earth, and he petitions the head of the afterlife to let him go back down for one day to make things right with the child he never got to meet. This story is so strange, largely because Billy is portrayed as pretty much unredeemable throughout. I kept waiting for him to turn a corner, to apologize for his violent actions, to admit that maybe hitting people you say you love isn't a good thing, but he doesn't ever. Instead, Julie defends his terrible behavior over and over again, and he gets away with it and never learns, not even after death. There are some great tunes in here, but they deserve to be in a better show that doesn't glorify abuse. The Boyfriend sure is something. It's a loose adaptation of a Broadway musical that was a pastiche of 1920s musical comedy, but in the film version, we're seeing the story of a theater troupe putting on that musical with a Hollywood casting director in the audience. The result is over 2 hours of watching people uncomfortably, deliberately hamming up an already hammy script, and it's one of the cringiest things I think I've ever watched. I felt like I was in the audience of an absolute train wreck of a show, and it wasn't even entertaining, just unpleasant. Some of the dancing is quite nice, and the songs might have been if they weren't mostly performed in obnoxious character voices. The weirdest thing to me of all of this is that the show was a parody of hammy shows in the first place, and that style is served best by embracing the cheesiness of it, not by creating a framework in which it appears clear that you're mocking it. This reads like the director absolutely loathed the original play and decided to transport the hideousness he saw in his mind to the film so that we'd all hate it too. And I guess it worked, but was that anyone's actual goal here? Probably not. Strawberry and Chocolate is a Spanish-language film set in 1970s Cuba. It tells the story of two men divided by their sexual orientation, one gay, one straight, and their politics, one firmly convinced of communism's good, one much less convinced. David, the communist straight one, is encouraged by one of his colleagues to get close to Diego and find out what anti-communist work they could turn him in for. But as the two spend more time together, a genuine friendship and understanding begins to develop between them. This feels like a movie I should really love, and I like a lot of what it does, but there are also a lot of scenes that feel less focused than I wish they were, and I end up with a muddied sense of overall arc. What it does well is make Diego incredibly likable and demonstrate clearly the connection between his personal life and his political one, and why he isn't just happy to sit back and ride along with the revolution like his colleagues are. He's by far the most interesting character in the story, and I'd frankly rather have seen more of him and his personal life than watch David struggle through his epiphany. It's a decent movie though, and worth watching if any of this sounds interesting to you. Bottle Rocket was, I believe, Wes Anderson's first full-length film. It stars Luke Wilson as a young man just released from a mental hospital, and Owen Wilson as his conniving friend trying to help them make it big in the world of crime. After one successful burglary, the two and their getaway driver hide out in an old motel, where Luke Wilson falls in love with the Spanish-speaking maid and decides to leave his life of crime behind. This film has a lot of the hallmarks of classic Wes Anderson materials, such as the vivid color palette and the understated conversation styles, and the Wilson Wilson brothers are a good fit for his style right off the bat, but it is lacking both the overt humor and the clearer themes of his later work. I suppose if pressed, I would guess that this is a film about friendship, but the friendship between the two leads is frequently manipulative and controlling, so it's hard to tell if the film is intending to say anything about that. It feels more like just a chance to let the Wilsons goof around and play off of each other, and while that didn't wow me or make me laugh out loud, it's certainly a pleasant enough way to spend an afternoon.